Hi, guys. This is Mrs. Spaeth. I'm here to just talk to you a little bit about our next topic of study, which is world population. I know you've already looked at some charts and you're going to be looking at a few more things in this lesson, but I wanted to pop in here and just kind of talk about and share some things that I normally would have shared with you if we would have been in school. So I know you've already seen a chart, but I like this graphic. I'm a visual learner. So this is a pie chart of the total world population from 2017. And this just gives you a big eye-opening, I think, glance into what we're really talking about when we discuss population. So when you look at the total of the world, majority of the people here are obviously going to be of the other countries. But you can see here that China is about 18.5% of total world population. China is the most populated country in the world. India is second. There is a lot of predictions that India will surpass China as being the most populated country in the world, maybe in the next few years. We're going to dive into that concept and the reasoning behind that this week. But really, what it boils down to is China is doing some things to try to control really the population and kind of decrease the population, where India is not doing some of those things. So you could see a flip at some point in your lifetime. So China and India are by far the most populated countries in the world. And then you have the United States, and then we have countries that successfully follow behind. So the reason why we're talking about world population at the beginning of this week is because the last topic that we're going to cover this school year is China. And you really can't talk about China without talking about population. It is very much a marker and a characteristic of the country and why the country does some of the things that it does. So, China, the most populated country in the world, and that's why we're talking about world population. So I know that you guys saw, I've already seen the top 10 most populated countries chart already. This is a different chart, just breaking it down for you by continent. So you may have already pointed out and you may have already responded that there is a theme with the top 10 countries in the world that most of them are Asian. I want to say maybe about 6 out of the 10 that were listed there are Asian countries. So Asia is the most populated continent in the world. This number here is density. So how many people would be living per square kilometer? So 96 people per square kilometer. This number is the population in millions. So if Asia is 4,000 millions, that really converts to 4 billion. And when you think about our country being, or sorry, our world being about 7 billion people, 4 billion of that 7 live in one area, one continent, and that is Asia. Now, Asia is also the largest continent, so you need to kind of keep those in mind. Then here it lists the most populated country in that continent. Obviously, China would be the most populated in the world, as well as Asia. And then this gives you the most populated city in the continent. So actually, it is not a Chinese city. It is the Greater Tokyo or the Tokyo metropolis area of Japan that is actually the most populated city in Asia. After Asia, the most populated continent would be Africa. Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa. We've already talked about that. And Cairo, Egypt is actually the most populated city. Following that, we have Europe, where Russia is actually the most populated country, and Moscow is the most populated metropolitan area or city. In North America, the United States is the most populated country. We are the third most populated country in the world. And the most populated city in North America is New York. Now, I will say that Mexico City is just slightly behind this number. So 23, I think this, no, 8 million. I'm not sure what that first number is. But the New York City area is about 8 million. And I know that Mexico City follows close after that. In South America, you have Brazil and Sao Paulo, Oceania, Australia, and the capital of, or not the capital, excuse me, Sydney is the most populated area in Oceania. And then Antarctica does not have any permanent residents, so not really a country, but the McMurdo Station is a scientific research station, and there's about 1,200 scientists at any given time that live down there. So this is just an interesting breakdown of the world where people are living and where you have those highly populated central zones. So on this next slide, this is actually, you're going to see this in the second video you watch after this one. I'm just showing you how the world has grown into where we are today with over 7 billion people. So if we go back to all the history of the world, it actually took us until the year 1800, or I think roughly around maybe 1803, 1804, if you want to be more precise, to reach that first 1 billion number. And if you kind of think about ancient civilizations and early human existence, it kind of makes sense. Life was harder. We didn't have medicines. We didn't understand maybe a lot about infectious diseases, how the human body works. People may have had a lot of children or babies, but they didn't really last long. They got sick or they got injured, and life was hard. Okay, life was definitely harder before this modern area that we live in, before we have modern medicine, and before we truly understand science and how the human body works. So it took a long time for the human race to get to that 1 billion mark. Now, we reached 2 billion in the year 1930. So it took us all of human history to the year 1800 to get to 1 billion, but then it only took us 130 years to get to 2 billion. So you can see here how this is where on that graph here to the left, this is when the slope starts going up. Okay. We reached 3 billion by 1959. So we reached that next billion mark in 29 years. We got to 4 billion in 1974, which was only 15 years after the 3 billion mark. We got to 5 billion in 1987, which was 13 years after the 4 billion mark. We got to 6 billion in 1999, which was only 12 years after the 5 billion mark. And we got to 7 billion in 2011, which was another 12 years. So you can see if you just look at these numbers, they get smaller and smaller, although the last couple billion that we've reached in the world have kind of been around the same time. So experts say that there's a couple of things that could happen. We could continue on this dramatic increase. We could slow down and kind of slow down our population growth. There's a lot of factors that go into how many people this world's going to be able to hold and how many people we're actually going to be able to have in this world. But I just think these numbers are interesting. How fast we got, and there will be a video that talks about this. How large we got, how quickly it happened. Okay, it did not happen that long from 1930 when we only had 2 billion to 2011. Okay, that's less than 100 years. We went from 2 billion to 7 billion. So it's just kind of crazy, but that's just the way the world is. Okay, this is exponential growth. If you've talked about that in math, that's definitely what you're seeing here. Here's just kind of a similar chart, but it breaks it down by the different regions of the world. So East Asia and the Pacific, this also includes China and India. It's always been one of the most populated places in the world, but there has been a sharp increase in the from 1960 to 2010, so the last 50 years or so. Southern Asia has also spiked quite significantly. Sub-Saharan Africa has also spiked, while Europe and Central Asia and North America have kind of flatlined. You see that they're not increasing by great amounts. So I'm going to get into this in our next Pear Deck, but I want to just go ahead and address this with a few interesting maps here. So how do we determine how fast a country is growing? It's pretty a simple a math equation, essentially. You take how many babies are being born within a year, and you subtract that by how many people are dying each year. That number that you get is going to show you how fast, how slow, or maybe even into the negatives, what's happening to your population growth. So you have to look at how many babies are being born in comparison to how many people are dying. If those two numbers are close or are very similar, then your population is not going to grow. If you've got a lot of babies being born, but not a lot of people are dying, you're going to have increased population growth. If you've got just a few babies being born and a lot of people dying, that's going to cause a negative growth. So it really factors into two things, okay? And there's a lot that goes into this is how many babies are being born? How many, children are women having? Are they, in today's world, women tend not to have as many kids as we did in the past. So in the past, it was pretty normal for a woman to have maybe six, seven, eight kids and have very large families because of the situation where not all those children and all those babies would make it into adulthood. Okay. Today, women have fewer babies, but those babies do live longer. Okay. So our population is kind of in some places flatlining or growing, or actually in some places declining. So keeping this in mind, I'm going to go over this in the next pair deck about China. This is how you figure out how a population is or is not growing. So here's just a world map showing you the average number of children that are being born per woman in the world. So you can see from this map that there are some areas in the world that are definitely what we would consider hot spots, where there's a lot of babies being born, and that is mainly in the region of sub-Saharan Africa. So on average, a woman in sub-Saharan Africa is having five, six, four children. Okay. And the reason for that, again, is because a lot of those children may not make it into adulthood. There's also another reason why, especially in the past or in parts of Africa, women have a lot of children is if it's an agricultural based society, the more children you have, the more help you have to help on the farm and to help to grow crops. So, in the past in the United States, women also had a large amount of children because we were an agricultural based society for a very long time. So, the more children you had, the more help you had in the family of getting the farm ready and harvesting the crops. We don't live like that anymore. So you can see here in the United States, our average has dropped down to only one or two children on average. Okay. So Africa tends to be kind of the hot spot where lots of babies are being born. And then you can kind of see from the map, different areas are, going in different directions as far as the average number of babies being born. So this is the first part of the equation. And then you have to take in consideration what is the life expectancy. So here's a life expectancy map showing you on average how long people will live. So if you think about those babies, how long are they going to be alive and maybe even have children of their own? Again, notice sub-Saharan Africa. This has a very, not a very low, but it has the lowest life expectancy rates in the world, where in some of these countries, people are only living into their 50s. So if you think about all those babies that are being born, some of them may not make it, or they may not live a very long lifespan. Where in some of the other countries, especially the dark blue, you have people on average of living into their 70s and 80s. So this is what you would subtract by. So the final product then looks something like this. So this is population rate of change. We'll talk more about this in the next pair deck. So this is once we figured out the math equation, how many babies are being born subtracted by the death rate. This is how much or how little a population is growing or possibly declining. So the darker the blue, it actually shows the faster a population is growing. So you can see in sub-Saharan Africa, there are some countries here that the population is actually growing quite a bit. And if you go back to the baby slide, this is also where women tend to have more children. Because of modern medicine and because of some of the advancements we made in agricultural sectors of study and science, people are getting access to food, they're getting access to medication, and they're living longer than they maybe ever had before. So as women continue to still have those large amounts of children, those children are surviving and maybe even having children of their own. So that's why you see large population increase, especially right in here. As the blue kind of fades a little bit lighter and maybe into purple, the purple countries are ones that are showing very little growth or quite even growth. So what that means, and especially here in the United States, this would be us, this would be China, this would be Brazil. Most of Europe is in this situation as well. We are having the same amount of babies as very close to our death rate. So our population is not growing quite as fast. We're actually evening out. We're very close to zero. Okay. Then the countries you see in red, this is actually where the population is declining. So places like Russia, in the Ukraine, Eastern Europe, population numbers are actually going down. Even in Japan, numbers are going down. Now, this can be for several different reasons. So you would have to really research the country to figure out what's happening. It could be that maybe people are dying in large amounts in these countries for some reason. Maybe there are people in these countries that are leaving the country. Maybe they're wanting to go live somewhere else. That takes into factor your population as well, even though that's not a death or a birth. If people are leaving your country and immigrating somewhere else, that could impact it. Or what really is actually happening in Japan is some women are choosing to have like maybe only one child, or there's been actually a very large surge in women choosing not to have children at all, especially as some of these countries, their economies develop. And women are getting out in the workforce and finding that they can earn high paying jobs. They're kind of dedicating themselves more to their work and they're choosing not to have children. So that could affect if older people continue to die off and there's not enough babies being born, your country's population can actually go down. So this is just an interesting way just to look at population, and there's so many factors that go into why a population may increase, decrease, or stay the same. But again, what we're focusing on here is we're focusing on total world population. What has happened in the past in our globe? How have we gotten to the point where we're at 7 billion people? And then beyond this Pear Deck that you finish here today, hopefully, we're really going to be looking at China. Okay, how this country, the most populated country in the world, has been able to handle. And actually, if you look at some of these slides, they've actually been able to control their population, even though that they have the largest amount of people in the world. So we're going to be really looking at that, diving into that deeper. So this is the end of this video and this little mini lesson here. Continue on to your Pear Deck. You're going to watch a couple more videos, think about some questions, do some responses, and I look forward to helping you guys learn a little bit more about population and China in the future.